Hey guys, what's going on? It's Dave with Evil Eye Games. Today we're going to continue on with setting up our settings menu. And one thing you may have noticed is if you've reopened the project is going to open into our test map. So we're going to want to change that. So I'm going to go to Edit, Project Settings, and we're going to go to Maps and Modes. And at the top here, under Default Maps, there's a Game Default Map and an Editor Startup Map. The game default map is the map that is loaded when the game is first launched. So after we create a product and it has an executable, when they run that executable, this is the map that will load. So we definitely want to go ahead and set this to our main menu map. And then there's the editor startup map. For convenience right now, I'm going to go ahead and save it as the main menu as well, so that when I open up the project from now on, it's going to go ahead and open up in the main menu. So I'm going to go ahead and close out of our project settings. And we just ended up creating some buttons. So I want to go ahead and import those. So we're going to go into our HUD folder. I'm going to right click and create a new folder. And we'll just make a folder of images. And then we're going to go ahead and find the folder that contains the images that we created. And we're going to go ahead and select them. And then we're going to go ahead and drag them down into our File Explorer, and I'm going to drop them into our Images folder. And it will go ahead and import our images for us. So I'm just going to go ahead and hit Save All to save those images. And we're going to go back into our HUD folder, and I'm going to go ahead and open up our Settings menu widget. So right now in our Settings menu, we have this left pane here with our Graphics, Sound, and Controls button, as well as the back button at the bottom. And we're going to want to place all of our settings in the right-hand pane. And what we're going to use is an overlay. So in our palette, we're going to go ahead and search for an overlay. And we're going to go ahead and drag it on the bottommost border in our right pane. Now what an overlay allows us to do is stack things on top of each other. So that's going to be very convenient. What we can do is just stack the graphics, the sound, and the controls menu on top of each other, and then set them visible or hidden based on what button we hit. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to search for a vertical box. And I'm going to drag 3 of these onto our overlay. And these 3 vertical boxes are going to be the different panes for the graphics, sound, and controls. So I'll select each one, and for the first one, I'm just going to go ahead and call it the graphics pane. The second one, I'm going to call the sound pane. And the third one, I'm going to call the controls pane. So now we have a quick reference to those 3 panes, and we want to make sure that they are set to fill horizontally and vertically so that they take up the entire area. So we're going to start with the graphics pane first, and I want to create a sort of title at the top for the graphics. So from our graphics pane, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to add a horizontal box. And I'm actually going to add 3 of these horizontal boxes to our graphics pane. Now the topmost one is going to end up being a title. So I'm going to go ahead and search for an overlay, and I'm going to drag it onto the top horizontal box. And then I want to go ahead and add an image, and we're going to drag that onto our overlay. And then finally we want to go ahead and add some text. So I'm going to go ahead and drag that onto our overlay as well. So for the overlay here, I want to set this to fill, so it'll take up the entire width of the screen. For the image, I am going to go ahead and set it to horizontally and vertically fill as well. And I'm going to set the color and opacity to our highlighted color. Then finally for the text, I'm going to set this to say graphics options. I'm going to give it some padding of 10, And I actually want to make this section bigger. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to grab our overlay, and I'm going to right click, and we're going to wrap with a size box. And the size box, I'm going to go ahead and set the height override to 100, which is the same height as our buttons. And then we'll go back to our text, and we want it to align vertically in the center. And we can go ahead and set the font as well as the font size. So I'm going to go ahead and minimize our size box. Next, we have a horizontal box below that's going to contain all of our graphical settings. So I'm going to go ahead and search for a horizontal box. And I'm going to drag this horizontal box onto our second horizontal box. And we're going to want to make sure this is set to fill, so it'll take up the entire width of the screen. And then I want to go ahead and add some text. And then I'm going to go ahead and add a spacer. And then I'm going to go ahead and add a button. I'm going to add some more text. And finally, I'm going to add a last button. So we should have text, spacer, button, text, button. So for the initial text, I'm going to set this to say resolution. And we can set the font as well as the size. And I'm going to add some padding into this. I'm going to set it to 10. And I want to make sure that the vertical alignment is set to center. Then I'm going to select the spacer. And we want to set this to fill. And then we have our first button. And this is going to be the left arrow. So I'm going to go ahead and under Style, I'm going to select the normal. And under Image, I'm going to select our left arrow texture. Now we made these textures at 500 by 500, so I'm going to size it down to 50 by 50. And then we want to make sure to select the dryas as an image. And then it looks a little stretched there, so for vertical alignment, I'm going to set it to the center. And then we're going to go to our hovered, and we're going to select our left arrow selected image. We will set the image size to 50 by 50, and we will draw as an image. And then finally, for our press button, we're going to set the image to our left arrow pressed. We'll set the size to 50 by 50 and draw as an image. Next, we're going to select the text block. And for a filler right now, I'm going to go ahead and set the text to just say hi. I'm going to set the font and the size. And then I want to actually control the width of this box. So I'm going to right click. I'm going to wrap with a size box. And then for the size box, I'm going to go ahead and select the width override. And I'm going to set this to, let's say, 200. And then we want the horizontal alignment to center on the text. So we'll select the text and set it to center. Lastly, we're going to have our button on the right. So for this one, I'm going to go ahead and do the same thing we did before with our images. So for style normal, I'm going to go ahead and search for our right button image. We'll select our right arrow. We'll set the size to 50 by 50. And we'll draw as an image. We'll do the same thing for our hovered. We'll find our right selected. We'll set the size to 50 by 50. And we'll draw as an image. And finally for pressed, we'll find our right pressed arrow. And we'll set the size to 50 by 50 and the draw as an image as well. And this one's stretched as well, so we're going to go ahead and we're going to vertically align to the center. And it's really close to the edge over here. So under padding, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to add some padding to the right, let's say 50. And I'm going to go ahead and open up this web page here. And I'm going to share a link down below for this. This is the Scaleability Reference for Unreal Engine. And these will give you an idea of all the settings that you can set within Unreal Engine. So as far as the settings I'm going to use, I'm going to set it up to use the anti-aliasing setting, the post-processing setting, the shadow setting, the texture setting, and the effects setting. The other settings aren't really all that useful to me. So for a reference, I'm going to drag this off to the side here so that I can work with it and reference it at the same time. So the first one I'm going to add is the anti-aliasing setting. So we'll find the topmost horizontal box for our resolution here. And I'm going to go ahead and shrink that down. Here we go. And then I'm going to want these settings to go ahead and stack vertically. So I'm going to grab the horizontal box for our resolution here. And I'm going to right click and we're going to wrap with a vertical box. And then our horizontal box with our resolution settings, I'm just going to name resolution so that we know what setting we're setting. And I'm going to select it and I'm going to hit Control-C to copy it. And I'll select the vertical box above it. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to paste 5 copies. And then for each one, I'm just going to name them as we go down the list. So the next one, I'm going to call our anti-aliasing. And then we have our post-processing. And then after that, there is the shadow quality. And then we have our textures. And then finally, there are the effects. And I'm going to go ahead and put this aside for now. And then I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to select the text boxes for each of these. And we're going to name them appropriately. So this one will be anti-aliasing. The next text box is going to be our post-process. And then the next one down is going to be our shadows. So we'll set the text for shadow quality. And then after our shadow quality, we have our textures. So I'll set the text to be texture quality. And then finally, we have our effects. So we'll set the text to be our effects quality. Now we're going to have to go ahead and set up these buttons so that they're actually going to affect what we want them to affect. So next we're going to have to go ahead and name all of these buttons. So for each of the buttons here, if you can't select them, it's going to be because the panes are sitting on top of it. So if you shrink this down, so we have the graphics pane, sound pane, and controls pane. To the right, there are these little eyeballs, and they will set the different elements visible or not visible. So I'm going to set the sound pane and the control pane to not be visible so I can click directly on this. I'm going to select the button here, and I'm going to go ahead and we want to name these buttons. So for the left buttons, I'm going to name the setting. So in this case, it'll be resolution. And I'm going to set it to the previous button. And then for the button on the right, I'm going to set it to the next button. So we'll call this the resolution next button. And we'll do the same thing for all of our buttons on the way down. We want to make sure that each one is named. So the anti-aliasing button here, I'm going to go ahead and call that the AA previous button. And then for the next arrow, we'll set it to the AA next button. Alright, so once you have that all set up, each button for the previous and the next should be set up with the name of the setting, previous or next, and then the word button, so that we can easily identify them in our graph. So I have my resolution previous and next, my AA previous and next, the post previous and next, the shadow previous and next, the texture previous and next, and finally the effects previous and next. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to minimize each one of these settings panes here to make the graph a little easier to read. And then finally, in the last horizontal box here, I'm going to set this to fill horizontally and vertically. And I want to go ahead and add a button to this. And I want to make this our apply button. So I'm going to get some text. And I'm going to drag some text onto our button. And I'm going to set the text to say apply. And we'll go ahead and set the font and the size. And I'm going to go ahead and set it to center on the button. And then for the button itself, I believe we're going to have to go ahead and I'm going to set the vertical alignment to center. And then we're going to set our colors. So for our normal, we'll go ahead and set it to our background color. For the hovered, we'll set it to our selected color. And then for the pressed, we'll set it to our selected color as well. And then I want to go ahead and wrap this in a size box to make it a specific size, whatever size I want it, because right now it's just fitting to the size of the text. And I'm going to give it a width and a height override. For the width, I'll set it to, let's see, 200. Let's try 300. And for the height, I'm going to set it to 100. Okay, that looks good. And then I'm going to go to our horizontal box above it, and I'm going to set it to horizontally aligned to center. So now we have an apply button down here, so the user can go ahead and apply the settings after they set them. So if we go ahead and compile and save and hit play, I'm not in the main menu map anymore. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to go to the maps and I'm going to load our main menu. And we'll try hitting play again. So we'll go to our settings and it is showing our graphics options. And it looks like I missed a setting on the graphics for the fill color. But it looks pretty good. So I'll just go back and for our graphics button here, I'm going to go ahead and correct the fill color. And that's going to complete our graphics options menu. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to collapse the graphics pane. There we go. I'm going to collapse this left pane as well. So we have our sound pane. So I'm going to go ahead and hide our graphics pane. And I'm going to show our sound pane. So I'm going to go ahead and add a horizontal box as well as a vertical box. And I'm going to go ahead and set these to, I'm going to set the vertical box to fill. And then the horizontal box will sit on the top of the vertical box. And we're going to do the same thing where we go ahead and add an overlay to our horizontal box. We're going to add an image and some text as well to that overlay. And then we can set the image to fill and the overlay to fill as well. And we can set the color of our image to be our highlight image. Set the text, we'll set the padding to 10. We'll set the text to say sound options. And then we can go ahead and set the font and the size. And then before we added a size box, so I'm going to right click on the overlay and wrap with a size box. And we're going to set the height override to 100 again. And then we're going to have to grab the text and set it to vertically align center. And that'll create the title for our sound options menu. So I'm going to shrink that horizontal box. And then in the vertical box below it, we're going to go ahead and we're going to add a horizontal box. And we'll drag and drop that onto the vertical box. And inside of this horizontal box, we're going to go ahead and search for some text. And we're going to add that to our horizontal box. And then we're going to search for a slider and add that to our horizontal box as well. And then finally, we're going to add some more text. So inside of our horizontal box here, we should have text, slider, text. And so for our text block here, I'm going to go ahead and right click and wrap with a size box. And we're going to go ahead and override the width. I'm going to set it to 500. We'll set it to 400. And then for the text in the size box, I'm going to go ahead and set this to be master volume. And we'll give it some padding. We'll set it to 10. And we'll go ahead and change the font and the font size. Next, I'm going to select the slider. And I'm going to set this to fill so that it takes up as much space as possible. And then we'll have our text block on the right. I'm going to right click and I'm going to wrap with a size box as well. So for this size box, I'm going to override the width. And we'll set it to, let's say 150. And we'll select the text below it. I want to align the text to the center of this block. And I'm going to go ahead and set the text to a placeholder of 100. And we want to vertical alignment to the center as well, so it sits even with the rest of the text. We're going to select our font, and we're going to select the size as well. So I'm going to go up to the top of this horizontal box here, which is our master volume. And I'm going to go ahead and rename it, and we'll call it master volume. And then I'm going to select this, and I'm going to hit Control-C to copy, and I'm going to paste it in the vertical box twice with Control-V. So for the master volume here, for the second one, we're going to set this to be our SFX volume. And then the third one is going to be the music volume. And we'll add a space in between master and volume. And then we're going to have to go ahead and set the variables on the sliders. So I'm going to select the master volume slider. And I'm going to name it just that, the master volume slider. For the second one, we'll name it the SFX slider. And then finally, for the last one, we'll set this to be the music slider. So that's going to complete our sound options menu. So we'll collapse all the way up to our sound pane. And I'm going to go ahead and hide our sound pane. And we're going to show our controls pane. So once again, to do the same thing, we're going to go ahead and add a horizontal box. And I always hate how this automatically expands everything sometimes, but it's an annoyance to kind of have to live with. And then we're going to go ahead and add a vertical box below the horizontal box. And the vertical box I'm going to want to set to fill. Or actually, we can leave it auto for right now. So in our horizontal box, we're going to go ahead and we're going to once again add an overlay. And then we're going to add a image. And then we're going to go ahead and add text. So we should have an overlay with an image and text. I'm going to set the image to automatically fill. And we're going to set the color and opacity to orange, or our highlighted color. And I guess we're going to have to go ahead and hit fill on the overlay above it. And then we're going to select the text block. I'm going to go ahead and set the text to controls, or we'll call it control options. We'll set the font and the size. And I'm going to add 10 to the padding. And then for the overlay, I'm going to right click and I'm going to wrap with a size box. And for that size box, we're going to override the height again to 100. And we're going to have to align the text to be vertically aligned to the center. So I'm going to go ahead and minimize that horizontal box. And in the control options here, I want to add a slider to control the mouse sensitivity. And I want to add a checkbox to go ahead and select whether or not we're inverting the mouse. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to grab a horizontal box. And I'm going to add 2 of these to our vertical box. And I'm going to go ahead and collapse that again because it's annoying me. And so for the top horizontal box, this will contain our slider. So you can actually go ahead and in our sounds pane here, I'm going to find the inside of the vertical box where a master volume is, and I'm going to select that, and I'm going to hit Control C to copy it, and I'm going to go ahead and paste that inside of our horizontal box here. Alright, and it looks like it didn't carry over all the settings. So I'm going to select the horizontal box that we just copied over. And I'm going to hit it to fill. So it'll fill up the entirety of the screen here. And I'm going to rename this horizontal box, and we're going to call it Mouse Sensitivity. And then we can change the text here to read Mouse Sensitivity. And then we can select the slider, and we're going to name it. We're going to call it the Mouse Sensitivity Slider. And I'm just going to go ahead and collapse our mouse sensitivity. And in the horizontal box below that, I'm just going to go ahead and add some text. And I'm going to go ahead and add a checkbox. And then I'm going to select the horizontal box here, and I'm going to set this to center horizontally and vertically. the text box, I'm going to set the text in there to invert mouse. We'll set the font and the size. And I'm going to add a padding of 10 around this. And then we'll select our checkbox. And under style, for the checkbox type, I want this to be a toggle button. And in order to make this big enough here, I'm going to right click on our checkbox and we're going to wrap with a size box. And for the size box, we're going to set the width and the height override. I'm going to set it to 35. And then we're going to have to set the vertical alignment to center to make sure it looks like a square. And I'm going to go ahead and we're going to compile and save at this point. So we're going to have our 3 main panes. So I'm going to go ahead and collapse these. So we're going to have a graphics pane, we're going to have a sound pane, and we're going to have a controls pane. Now we have to make these panes appear and disappear when the buttons to the left are pressed. In order to do this, I'm going to go back to our main window, and we're going to go into our HUD, and we're going to start creating more enums. So I'm going to go ahead and right click and create a new folder, and I'm going to call this enums. And we can move our state HUD or HUD state enum into the enums folder. And in there, I'm going to right click and I'm going to create a new blueprint enumeration. And I'm going to call this the settings menu enum. And we're going to go ahead and open this up. And I'm going to add 3 enumerations. And we'll set the first one to be graphics. The second one will be sound, and the last one will be control. And I'm going to go ahead and save that, and we'll close out. And then back in our settings menu widget, I'm going to go over to our graph. And to the left here, we're going to end up creating a new variable. And I'm going to call this the settings menu state. And then for the type, we're going to search for our options. What do we call it? It was a menu. Here we go. We're going to set it to the settings menu enum. And we're going to compile and save. And the default state for this, I'm going to leave it as graphics. And then in our event graph here, we have our 3 events for when we click the graphics, the sound, and the controls button. And we're basically just going to go ahead and set this variable for each one of these. And then we'll select the appropriate menu state for each one. So when the sound button is clicked, we're going to set it to sound. And when the controls button is clicked, we're going to set it to controls. And we'll go ahead and compile and save. And we're going to go back to the designer. And I'm going to find the pane for each one of these. So for the graphics pane, I'm going to select the vertical box that is the graphics pane. And to the right, for visibility, I'm going to go ahead and click the bind button, and we're going to create a binding. And I'm going to rename this because I, of course, hate the naming convention that is automatically applied. And then we're going to drag this return node off to the side. And all we're going to do is we're going to get our settings menu state. And we're going to check if it's equal to graphics. And we're going to throw in a branch. And we'll connect up our execution pin. And then I'm just going to go ahead and duplicate this return node. And we'll plug 1 into true and 1 into false. Now, if it's true, we want to set the pane to visible. And if it's false, we want to set it to hidden. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to copy this settings menu state equals branch because we're going to use it multiple times. And I'm going to go ahead and close this. We'll go back to our designer. And I'm going to select our sound pane. And once again, for visibility, we're going to go ahead and hit bind and create binding. And I'm going to rename the function again. And I'm going to go ahead and paste in our check that we performed before. And I'm going to go ahead and duplicate this return node again. And we'll set false to hidden. And then for the equals here, we're going to set the state we're looking for to be our sound. So we can compile and save that and close out of our function. And then we're going to go back to our main designer. And I'm going to select the controls pane. And once again, we're going to go to visibility, create binding. And I'm going to rename this binding. And I'm going to drag this off to the side, and we're going to go ahead and, oh, I made a copy with that before, so I'll just go ahead and redo it. So I'll get my menu settings state. We'll check to see if it equals, and we'll check to see if it equals the control setting. Throw in a branch. And then we'll duplicate our return node. And if it's false, we'll set it to hidden. So we should be able to compile and save. And if we hit play, let's test it out. So we'll go to our settings, and if we hit graphics and sound and controls, the menu changes based on what button we hit. So the next thing I want to take care of is I want these buttons to stay highlighted in the event that they are clicked on. So if we're in the graphics menu options here, I want this graphics button to stay highlighted. Now, the problem with buttons in UE4 is that you can kind of tint the buttons, but you can't set the state that the button is in, or you can't actually set the exact color of the button. So we're going to have to perform a bit of trickery in order to get these buttons to perform this way. So I'm going to minimize our right pane over here because we don't need this for the time being. And if we click on our graphics button here, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to right click on our button, and I'm going to wrap with a border. And I'm going to select the border. And we want to make sure that the padding is set to 0. And I'm going to go ahead and for the brush color, I'm going to go ahead and set it to our background color. And then I'm going to go to our next to our brush color here. There's the option to bind. I'm going to go ahead and create a binding. And I'm going to go ahead and rename this function. So we're going to call it get graphics button border color. And we're going to go ahead and we're going to get that settings menu state again. And we're going to check to see if it's equal. And of course, we're going to check to see if it's equal to the graphics. And we're going to go ahead and throw in a branch. And we'll connect up our pins. And we'll duplicate the return node. And we'll plug one into true and one into false. Now, if it's true, I want it to be our highlighted color. So I'm going to click on the return value and select our highlighted color. And if it's false, I want it to be our background color. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and promote each one to a variable. So for the true node, for our highlighted color, I'm going to just call it highlighted color. And then for the return node for false, I'm going to promote this to a variable. And I'm going to call this the background color. And that's going to be it for this button. So I'm going to go ahead and close out of this. We're going to go back to our designer, and we're going to do the same thing for the sound and the controls button. So we'll go ahead and wrap our sound button with a border. We'll make sure that the padding is set to 0. We'll set the brush color to black. And then we'll go ahead and create a binding. And I'm going to go ahead and rename this. So I'll set it to get sound button border color. So we'll go ahead and get our settings menu state. We'll see if it's equal to our sound. And if it's true, we'll set it to one color. If it's false, we'll set it to another. So now we can just grab those highlighted colors and plug it into the true node, and the background color and plug it into the false node. So we'll go ahead and close out of this function. And finally, we'll select the controls button, and we'll go ahead and wrap with a border. And we'll select the border. We'll make sure the padding is 0. We'll set the brush color to our background color. And we'll go ahead and bind and create a binding to the brush color. So once again, we'll check to see if our settings menu state is equal to the control state. And we'll add in a branch. And we'll duplicate our return node. And if it's true, we'll set it to the highlighted color. If it's false, we'll set it to the background color. And I forgot to rename this. So we'll go ahead and rename it, and I'll call it the Get Controls Button Border Color. And we'll go ahead and compile and save. And there's one last thing that we're going to have to do. In order for this background color to show through, for each one of these buttons, we're going to have to actually set the normal button style to a transparent color. So I'm going to go ahead, I already have one in my palette here, but you basically want to take any color and set the alpha to 0, and that will make the button transparent. So I'll go ahead and select that color and hit OK, and we'll do the same thing for our sound and for the control button as well. And if we hit compile and save and hit play, go to our settings. Without touching anything, you'll see that the graphics is set to the highlighted background. If we hit the sound button, the sound will remain highlighted. And if we hit controls, the controls will remain highlighted. And then I'm just going to go ahead and check real fast in here. We do have some images in there that are set as variables. So just to pick that out real quick, in our hierarchy in our designer, I'm just going to search for image, and I'm going to make sure that these images are not set to variables, because we're going to have a lot of variables here, and we want to reduce anything that we don't need. And there's a button 1131 that we didn't assign. So let's search for that button 11_1131. Nope. Let's just take a look at our buttons. It'll probably be one that is unnamed. And it's this button. And that looks like our apply button. So that is in fact our apply button. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to give this button a name, and we're going to call it the apply button. And everything else in here looks pretty good. We don't have any excessive items. We do have the checkbox. We did not set the name for the checkbox. So I'm going to go ahead and collapse these so I can find stuff, and we're going to show our controls pane, and then we're going to select the checkbox, and I'm just going to call this the invert mouse checkbox. Alright, so it looks like all of our variables now are all set. So we'll just compile and save. And in the next video, we're going to go about and we're going to actually make these buttons cause some effect changes in our menu here. So that's going to complete today's video. If you have any questions or comments, go ahead and leave them down below, and thanks for watching.